If you've ever watched a Damian Walter video, then you've heard the term weak base, and you know it's not a good thing. Today, I'm going to show you how to restore the weak bases of your Locs to their former glory. Let's get it. Welcome back to the Atreyu Locs channel. Hi, I'm Atreyu, a semi-freeformer who is dedicated to bringing you the best tips to grow a healthy set of Locs. If this is your first time, make yourself comfortable. I'm glad to have you. So what is a weak base anyway? Basically, a weak base is when a Loc does not have the support it needs at its roots. Why wouldn't a Loc have the support it needs at its roots, you ask? Well, there are two reasons. The first reason is that the hair is thinning at the roots, and therefore you don't have as many strands going into the Loc anymore. The second reason is that you have hair that grows away from your Locs, and as a result you don't have as many strands going into the Loc. See the common denominator there? Your Locs thin out when there are fewer strands going into the Loc than used to go into it. Say you start out with 50 strands that make up a Loc. Then all of a sudden you have 25, then 15, and it keeps decreasing. The number of strands continually decreases. Then you have a weak base. While the Loc, the original Loc, was made up of 50 strands, because you're thinning, which could be a result of traction alopecia, or maybe you have hair that grows away from your Locs. Either way, the Loc is thinning. Now you have fewer strands going into that Loc. You have found yourself with a compromised or weak base. Make sense? Now you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between reason 1 and reason 2? In both cases, you have fewer strands going into the Loc. Well, in reason 1, I said that the hair is thinning at the roots. So this means that there are actually fewer strands coming out of your scalp. And that's why you have, therefore, fewer strands going into the Loc. In the second scenario, where you have hair that grows away from your Locs, there is still hair growing out of your scalp. So maybe all 50 strands that originally made up that Loc, they're still all coming out of your scalp. It's just that not all 50 of those strands are growing into the Loc. So that's the difference. In scenario 1, you're thinning at the scalp, so you're having fewer strands that are actually coming out of your scalp, that are growing out of your scalp. In scenario 2, you have all the strands growing out of your scalp, but because your hair grows away from your Locs, they're not all growing into the Loc. So what can you do about this? Well, if you relate to reason 1, your hair is thinning at the roots, like at the scalp, like you have fewer strands coming out of your scalp, then I suggest you stop all maintenance. One of the reasons this could be happening is due to too much tight maintenance. So whether it's just a retwist or interlocking, or if you're getting tight styles, this can cause traction alopecia. You could be doing damage to the follicles. And if you damage a follicle, then you no longer have the strand. So I would suggest stopping all maintenance, giving your scalp and your head a break, as people love to say, and seeing if that hair will actually start to grow back once you've eliminated the tension. If you find that you relate to reason 2, then definitely keep watching, because this video is just for you. And if you're enjoying this video, definitely hit the like button. Don't forget to smash the subscribe button if you want to see more Loc videos from WA. And definitely hit the notification bell so that you are notified every single time I upload, as soon as I do. So I made a video back in the day called How to Repair a Loc with a Weak Base. Basically demonstrating how to restore a weak base to its former glory. AKA, how to get those hairs that are at your scalp going back into the Loc. The technique that I used in that video, while it was a great temporary fix, was just that, temporary. It wasn't until later on in my Loc quest that I learned about a better technique, which is what I'm going to demonstrate for you guys today. I've shown this technique in other videos, but most likely you haven't seen them if you're watching this one. I call it the braid technique for dreadlocks. I first learned about it through Yanni, the lockologist. I'm sure you guys all know her if you're watching my video, and it has saved many a Loc for me. So this is the technique that I use to repair my Locs with the weak base in 2021. Demonstration time, people. Demonstration time. All right, so I'm in the bathroom, and now I'm going to demonstrate how I repair a Loc with the weak base using the braid technique for dreadlocks if you have hair that grows away from your Locs. Now, to be honest, My locks don't really have weak bases anymore because of this technique, because I've used it in the past. But I could still show you what I mean about having hair that grows away from my locks. So don't mind me, I'm gonna be looking in the mirror while I show you. Basically, my locks, they're, you know, the bases are pretty good. You see the thickness of the lock, and then you see the amount of hair that's coming out of my scalp that's attached to the lock is comparable. So these locks, they have decent bases. You see this thickness for the lock, and you see all that hair coming out. Any lock that I pull, that's pretty much the case. That thickness and then that amount of hair. That thickness and then that amount of hair. Even the smaller ones, that thickness and that amount of hair. But if I go in a little bit closer to this one, and if I turn it, you can see a little bit of, you know, thinning, quote, thinning. Not because I have fewer strands coming out of my scalp, but because a lot of those hairs, they're at my scalp and they're not staying into the lock. So if I pulled the surrounding hair up, then you see, you know, all the hair is there, okay? That's what I mean about having hair that grows away from your locks. So let's look at this one up front. Here, like, see all that hair? That's the hair that is growing away from my lock. And it could be argued that this lock is thinning out while there's still a lot of hair going into the lock. In actuality, all of this should be into the lock, okay? All of this hair should be going into the lock to keep it nice and thick. This lock is also a little bit flat right now because I haven't retwisted it, and it's usually just laying on my forehead like that. So yeah, it has that flat look right now. But if I wanted to round it out, I could just spray some water on it and palm roll. FYI for those of you guys who have flat locks, they don't like them, but they don't bother me. At least not too many of them. All right, so getting back to what I was saying, this lock has hair that grows away from it. That's what all this is down here, okay? And in that video I made years ago, how to repair a lock with a weak base, basically what I was saying was to grab these hairs and then just wrap them around the lock. And I was doing this while I was in the middle of a retwist, okay? And it did kind of thicken up the base. But what would happen is that if you sweat, maybe you were exercising or you washed your hair, those hairs that weren't really fully, completely attached to the lock, they would start to coil back toward the scalp. And so it was a temporary fix at best, which is now why I use the braid technique. So I've demonstrated this technique before, but basically you just have the lock, that's one section, and then the hairs, split those, the free hair that's not going into the lock, you split it into two sections. So that in total you have 3 sections, 1, 2, and then 3. And then you just braid those hairs, those 3 sections. Technically you braid the 2 sections, I should say, around the lock. I know it's hard for you guys to see. I'll show you the finished product, and I have other videos that demonstrate this technique, but I just wanted to kind of show you on here. Okay, so basically I've thickened up this base by braiding those hairs that were at the scalp that should have been in the lock all along but weren't. I braided them into the lock, and that thickens up the base. So the benefit of braiding the hair into the lock versus just wrapping it around like I showed you about a minute ago is that it lasts longer and it kind of stays in the lock. Those hairs, for the most part, will stay into the lock because they're braided in there. They're more tangled and therefore more attached to the lock. Okay, so this is how I repair a lock with a weak base using the braid technique for dreadlocks in 2021. Once again, this is only applicable for people who have hair that grows away from your locks. Like I said before, if you're thinning at the scalp, then this is not the technique for you because you need actual hair to braid into the lock, right? If you are thinning at the scalp, then you need to just stop all maintenance, take a break, and see if those hairs will start to grow again once you've eliminated the source of the tension that's being applied to your scalp and follicles, okay? So what I want to know now is, do you guys have locks with weak bases? And if you do, what do you use to repair those bases? Or are you someone who has lost locks because you didn't know you had hair that grows away from your locks? I bet many of you noticed that your locks are thinning, but you didn't know why. So many lockers have hair that grows away from their locks thin out, and then eventually break off. It's sad because these lockers, while trying to be conscientious about over manipulation, which can lead to thinning, run straight toward that same thinning that they were trying to avoid, resulting of course from under manipulation, not doing enough maintenance to keep those hairs into the lock, and then those locks thinning out as a result. Please share this video with other lockers who might be experiencing this, and I would say just share it with all other lockers you know, because they may know someone who is experiencing this, even if they themselves are not. I really hate to see people losing locks when it could have been prevented had they only known. Let's use the lock community how it was meant to be used, to spread knowledge and information so that we can all grow a healthy set of locks. If you choose to love, do so unconditionally, because loving with conditions conditions the heart to not really love at all. This is Atreyu Locs, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.